The Shimla Agreement, signed on July 2, 1972 between Indira Gandhi and Zulfikar Bhutto, must be understood not as a single issue arrangement but about prisoners of war, but as a comprehensive post-war political settlement designed to reshape the entire structure of India-Pakistan relations after the decisive rupture of 1971. The agreement emerged from a unique historical moment in which India held overwhelmingly military, diplomatic, and psychological leverage following Pakistan's defeat and the creation of Bangladesh and the capture of approximately 93,000 Pakistani military personnel. Against this backdrop, the Shimla Agreement represented an attempt to convert battlefield victory into a durable political framework that would prevent future wars while institutionalizing India's strategic advantages. At its core, the Shimla Agreement sought to redefine the rules of engagement between the two South Asian rivals. One of the most consequential provisions was the mutual commitment that all disputes between India and Pakistan would be resolved through peaceful means and crucially through bilateral negotiations. This clause effectively dismantled Pakistan's long-standing strategy of internationalizing the Kashmir dispute through the United Nations or third-party mediation. By binding Pakistan to a bilateral framework, India succeeded in narrowing the diplomatic battlefield and ensuring that future negotiations would occur on terms more favorable to New Delhi, where relative power asymmetries could exert greater influence. Closely tied to this was the transformation of the 1971 ceasefire line in Jammu and Kashmir into what became known as the LOC or the Line of Control, while the agreement didn't formally recognize the LOC as an international boundary. It committed both sides to respect it and refrain from altering it unilaterally. This provision had long-term strategic implications. It stabilized the immediate military situation in Kashmir, reduced the likelihood of conventional war over territorial adjustments, and subtly entrenched the territorial status quo that emerged from India's military success. In practical terms, it forced the Kashmir conflict into a controlled, limited framework rather than allowing it to escalate into repeated full-scale wars. The agreement also emphasized mutual respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence, along with a clear commitment to non-interference in each other's internal affairs. The clause was particularly significant in the aftermath of Bangladesh's independence, as it constrained Pakistan from seeking revenge or destabilization strategies aimed at India's internal cohesion. For India, this reinforced its claim to being the regional status quo power committed to stability, while simultaneously placing moral and legal constraints on Pakistan's future conduct, at least on paper. Another major dimension of the Shimla Agreement concerned normalization. Both sides agreed to restore diplomatic relations, reopen communication channels, and resume trade and travel links and promote people to people contact. These provisions reflected an understanding that lasting peace could not be sustained purely through military deterrence, but required functional political economic engagement. While progress on normalization was uneven and often derailed by subsequent crises, the agreement nonetheless established a framework that later governments on both sides repeatedly referenced when attempting reapproachment. The question of prisoners of war and territorial withdrawal, though not exhaustively detailed in the Shimla Agreement itself, formed a critical background context to its signing. India agreed to repatriate the 93,000 Pakistani POWs and withdraw its forces from territory captured in West Pakistan during the war. In return, Pakistan implicitly accepted the new geopolitical reality of South Asia, introducing the irreversible independence of Bangladesh. Although formal recognition of Bangladesh by Pakistan occurred later, the Shimla framework made negotiation unavoidable by dismantling Pakistan's negotiating position. From a strategic perspective, the Shimla Agreement was designed less as a punitive settlement and more as a structural reset. Indira Gandhi's government calculated that a humiliated but intact Pakistan, constrained by bilateralism and territorial status quo, would be less dangerous in the long term than a destabilized or fragmented adversary. The agreement thus reflected a realist assessment that during dominance that during that en- the enduring dominance is achieved not merely through coercion but through institutional arrangements that lock in favorable outcomes over time. However, the agreement has also been the subject of intense criticism, particularly within India. Critics argue that New Delhi squandered a historic opportunity to extract a definitive settlement on Kashmir or impose more binding constraint on Pakistan's military posture. By returning POWs the territory without securing a permanent resolution, India arguably allowed Pakistan the strategic space to recover, rearm, and later pursue asymmetric warfare strategies, including insurgency and proxy war conflicts in the Kashmir region. Supporters of agreement countered that attempt to impose a harsher settlement would have provoked international backlash and destabilized the region, and possibly pushed Pakistan into deeper alignment with external powers. In the decades that followed, the Shimla Agreement became both a reference point and a battleground of interpretation. India consistently invoked it to oppose third-party mediation and emphasize bilateral dialogue, while Pakistan often attempted to reinterpret and dilute its implications, and especially regarding Kashmir. Despite wars, cries, and the and periods of extreme hostility, the agreement's core principle, bilateralism, respect the LOC, and avoidance of full-scale war have exerted a restraining influence on the conflict, even if imperfectly. In historical terms, the Shimla Agreement stands as one of the most consequential diplomatic documents in South Asian history. It didn't resolve the India-Pakistan rivalry, nor did it eliminate the Kashmir dispute, but it fundamentally altered how the rivalry would have conducted. By embedding military outcomes into political norms and procedural constraints, it transformed a decisive wartime victory into a long-term strategic advantage. The agreement's endurance, despite repeated violations and reinterpretations, underscores its significance as a framework that continues to shape the logic, limits, and language of India Pakistan relations more than 5 decades after it was signed.